Today, we're diving into another fascinating psychology book called Persuasion. The more books I read about psychology, the more unsettling it becomes. They reveal just how easily human behavior can be influenced without people ever realizing it. The most surprising part is that many of the persuasion techniques you'll hear about in this video operate beneath your conscious awareness. Your logical mind doesn't even notice them. They work silently in the background, subtly shaping your thoughts and decisions. It's almost like giving someone a hidden pill before a conversation begins. They believe they're making completely independent choices, when in reality, their subconscious has already been influenced. Here's one remarkable example. Researchers sent an exceptionally attractive man, someone with the appearance of a professional model, into a shopping mall. His task was simple: approach random women and ask for their phone number for a date. As you would expect, many women declined. Giving your number to a complete stranger is a risky decision. But something unexpected happened. Whenever the man approached women in front of one particular type of store, his success rate increased dramatically. Can you guess what kind of store it was? It wasn't a perfume shop. It wasn't a chocolate store. It was a flower shop. Flowers have long been associated with romance, affection, and love. Simply standing near a flower store unconsciously activated romantic thoughts in the minds of the women, making them more likely to say yes. After the experiment, the researchers interviewed the women who had given out their phone numbers. They asked whether the flower shop had influenced their decision in any way. Every single participant gave the same answer: "No, I made that decision myself." None of them believed the environment had played any role at all. Researchers conducted another experiment with a similar goal. Once again, a man approached women on the street and asked them out. This time, however, they changed only one variable: the object he was carrying. Different objects produced different results, but one stood out above the rest. Can you guess what it was? It wasn't an expensive watch. It wasn't a bouquet of flowers. It was a guitar case. Simply carrying a guitar case significantly increased the number of positive responses. Before the man even spoke, the object had already created positive assumptions about his personality. People subconsciously associated him with creativity, talent, and attractiveness. Now let's move away from dating and look at the business world. Researchers conducted an experiment using an online furniture store. Half of the visitors landed on a web page with soft clouds displayed in the background. The other half saw a background featuring images of coins. Everything else on the website remained exactly the same. The results were fascinating. Visitors who first saw the clouds focused on comfort. They spent more time looking at furniture that appeared soft, cozy, and relaxing. Meanwhile, visitors who first saw the coins paid far more attention to price. They searched for discounts and selected the least expensive options. Afterward, researchers asked participants whether the background images had influenced their decisions. Almost everyone laughed. They insisted that clouds or coins had absolutely nothing to do with the furniture they chose. They believed they had made completely rational and independent decisions. But the purchasing data told a very different story. So far, we've seen how visual cues can influence behavior. But what about words? Can a single sentence change the way people think? The answer is yes. Consider the story of a salesperson trying to sell a product worth $75,000. Every time he mentioned the price, customers immediately began negotiating. Many felt the price was too high and simply walked away. Then he made one tiny adjustment to his presentation. Just before revealing the actual price, he would smile and jokingly say, "Obviously, I can't charge you $1 million for this product." Only then would he reveal the real price of $75,000. The results changed almost overnight. Very few customers tried to negotiate. Hardly anyone complained that the product was too expensive. Why? Because compared to $1 million, $75,000 suddenly felt much smaller. Logically, the joke had nothing to do with the product's true value. It shouldn't have changed anyone's decision, but that's not how the human mind works. Our brains naturally compare numbers. The first number we hear becomes a mental reference point, making every number that follows seem larger or smaller by comparison. It's a simple psychological principle. yet it has an extraordinary influence on the decisions people make every single day. The reality is that whether we realize it or not, our subconscious constantly shapes how we perceive the world. Here's another fascinating experiment. A group of marketers wanted people to test a brand new energy drink and provide feedback. Since the product was unfamiliar, many people refused. That reaction made sense. People naturally hesitate when asked to try something new. So the marketers changed their approach. Before mentioning the drink, they asked a simple question. Would you consider yourself an adventurous person? Many participants smiled and answered yes. Only then did the marketers ask if they would like to try a brand new energy drink. This time, far more people agreed. Nothing about the drink had changed. The only difference was that participants had just described themselves as adventurous. Once people adopt a particular identity, they naturally want their actions to remain consistent with it. I experienced something very similar myself. A few years ago, I was meeting with a banker. Eventually, our conversation shifted toward investment products. He explained several options, but none of them interested me. I was only half listening while wondering how soon the meeting would end. Then, just before introducing another investment, he said something that instantly captured my attention. This is the product I would recommend even to my own mother. The moment I heard that sentence, everything changed. I leaned forward. I listened carefully. And I immediately trusted both the banker and the investment much more than I had just seconds earlier. Without even realizing it, he had activated one of the most powerful principles of persuasion described by Robert Cialdini. It's called unity. Unity is based on a simple but powerful idea. We are much more likely to trust and cooperate with people whom we see as part of our own group. The stronger that shared identity, the stronger the influence. When someone makes us feel that they're one of us, our defenses naturally begin to lower. In the banker's case, mentioning his mother suggested that he applied the same standard of care to me that he would apply to someone he loved most. Whether intentional or not, that single sentence created an immediate sense of trust. Warren Buffett used this exact principle when addressing concerns about the future of Berkshire Hathaway. Many investors worried about what would happen after Buffett was no longer leading the company. In a letter to shareholders, he wrote, "I'll tell you what I would say to my family if they asked me about Berkshire's future." That single sentence was incredibly persuasive. Rather than speaking as a CEO addressing investors, Buffett spoke as a family member offering advice to those he cared about most. Family represents the strongest form of unity. People will often sacrifice time, money, and even their own safety to help close relatives. Robert Cialdini demonstrates that this principle can be used even when influencing people who aren't part of your own family. He once asked students and their parents to complete a questionnaire. The students almost always responded, but parents rarely did. The response rate from parents was often below 20%. So he made one small change. He told the students that if their parents completed the survey, the student would receive 1 extra point on the single test. 1 point in an entire semester was practically meaningless. It was unlikely to affect anyone's final grade. Yet the response rate from parents jumped to an astonishing 97%. By connecting the request to helping a family member, participation increased almost 5-fold. The implications of these studies are enormous. If I can direct your attention toward helpfulness before making a request, you become more likely to behave like a helpful person. If I activate ideas of fairness, you're more likely to act fairly. If I surround you with symbols of romance, you're more likely to make romantic decisions. In other words, persuasion can temporarily shape your identity. It can influence how you see yourself. It can influence how you see other people. And it can influence how you interpret the message you're about to receive. The next experiment demonstrates just how deeply rooted this process really is. Researchers in Belgium gathered participants and showed them an ordinary household object. The object itself never changed, only the background image did. The participants were divided into 3 groups. The first group saw the object with a picture of one person standing alone in the background. The second group saw 2 people standing near each other, but separated. A third group saw 2 people standing shoulder to shoulder. During the experiment, the researchers intentionally dropped several objects onto the floor, pretending it was an accident. They wanted to see who would stop and help. Only about 20% of participants in the first two groups offered assistance. But in the third group, where the background subtly suggested togetherness and connection, the number of people who helped was nearly 3 times higher. Now comes the most astonishing part. These participants weren't adults. They weren't college students. They weren't trained psychologists. They were only 18-month-old children. Most of them could barely speak. They had almost no logical reasoning skills. Yet even at that age, a simple background image influenced whether they chose to help another person. That tells us something profound. Persuasion isn't merely a trick of adult thinking. It's deeply woven into the way the human brain works. No matter how intelligent, logical, or educated we believe ourselves to be, our subconscious is constantly processing signals that influence our behavior. Researchers have discovered many similar effects. Simply placing an image of a person deep in thought in the corner of a screen can make people think more carefully and make fewer mistakes. Displaying an image of someone crossing the finish line in a race can motivate people to work harder and improve their performance. Tiny visual cues can quietly shape our thoughts, decisions, and actions without us ever noticing. So how can we use this knowledge in everyday life? How can we recognize these hidden influences and perhaps even apply them ethically to become better communicators? I have 6 practical lessons that we'll explore next, but before we get to those, there's one simple analogy that perfectly summarizes everything we've discussed so far and makes these principles incredibly easy to understand. The central lesson behind all of these experiments can be explained with one simple analogy. Imagine you're planting a seed. If you want that seed to grow into a healthy plant and eventually produce fruit, 2 things must happen. First, you need a good seed. Second, you need to prepare the soil. Even the highest quality seed won't grow if it's planted in poor soil. Persuasion works the same way. The seed represents your message, your argument, your request, or your idea. The soil represents the mental state of the person receiving that message. Most people spend all their time trying to improve the seed. They focus on finding better words, stronger arguments, and more convincing presentations. But this book argues that preparing the soil is often even more important. In every experiment we've discussed, something happened before the actual message was delivered. A picture, a question, a sentence, or a subtle environmental cue quietly prepared the mind of the listener. By the time the message arrived, the decision had already been influenced. With that in mind, let's look at 6 practical ways to apply these principles ethically. The first lesson involves giving away free products. If you're offering something free to your customers, consider giving it to their family members instead of directly to the customers themselves. Helping a loved one creates a much stronger emotional response than receiving something personally. Remember the experiment where offering students a single bonus point dramatically increased the number of parents who completed the survey. Family connections can be surprisingly powerful. The second lesson is about asking for advice instead of feedback. Suppose you've created a new product and want customers to help improve it. Instead of asking, "What's your opinion?" or "Can you give me some feedback?" try asking, "What advice would you give?" The difference sounds small, but psychologically it's significant. Advice creates a sense of partnership. It invites people to work with you rather than simply judge your work. It creates a feeling of unity instead of distance. The words we choose shape the relationship before the conversation even begins. The third lesson applies if you're asking for a raise. Timing matters. If you've recently received praise from customers, completed an important project, or achieved an outstanding result, that's the ideal moment to have the conversation. Why? Because your recent success is already fresh in everyone's mind. At that moment, your identity is associated with achievement and value, making your request much stronger than it would be on an ordinary day. The fourth lesson is especially useful when asking people to support a cause. If you're a student asking other students to donate, mention that you're a student too. If you're speaking to fellow teachers, entrepreneurs, parents, or volunteers, make that shared identity clear. People naturally trust those they see as members of their own group. Creating that sense of belonging activates the principle of unity and makes cooperation much more likely. The fifth lesson is to design your environment around your goals. For a long time, I thought motivational quotes on office walls were meaningless. You know the kind of phrases I'm talking about: success, courage, quality, customer first. I assumed they were just decorations, but research suggests otherwise. The environment around us constantly sends signals to our subconscious. Those signals influence how we think and behave, even when we're not paying attention. Ask yourself what you're trying to achieve, then build an environment that constantly reminds you of that goal. When one of my goals was to earn $10,000 a month, I bought a fake stack of $10,000 bills and kept it on my desk as a daily reminder. When I wanted to become a better investor, I printed the phrase, "Make your money work for you," framed it, and placed it where I'd see it every day. The same idea applies to your phone wallpaper, your computer background, your workspace, and even the music you listen to. If you're working on a task that requires deep concentration, listening to music designed for focus can help create the right mental state. Before I write scripts like this one, I often watch a video from one of my favorite YouTubers. His content is clear, simple, and incredibly well-structured. Watching just a few minutes of his work helps shift my own thinking toward clarity and simplicity before I begin writing. The sixth and perhaps most important lesson is this: bring people into the right mindset before delivering your message. Let me give you a real example. I once needed to convince a colleague to make an important change to a project we were working on. We both knew the change would improve the project, but he resisted because it meant extra work. To make matters worse, we'd already had several disagreements during the previous week. He had reached a point where he instinctively opposed almost every suggestion I made. After failing twice to persuade him, I tried a different approach. Before discussing the change, I reminded him of something that had happened several months earlier. I said, "Do you remember when you suggested a major change to the project and I disagreed with you?" He nodded. I continued, "Even though I disagreed, I supported your idea because it was the best decision for the project. Looking back, it turned out to be the right choice, and our project benefited because of it." Then I added, "Today, I'm asking for a change that we both know will improve the project. Just like before, this isn't about you or me. It's about doing what's best for the project." He paused for a moment. Then he agreed. What changed wasn't the proposal. It was his mindset. Instead of thinking about winning an argument, he was thinking about serving the project. That's the true power of persuasion. Before you speak, ask yourself what mental state the other person needs to be in. Do they need to feel cooperative, fair, honest, open-minded, confident? Find an ethical way to guide their attention toward that mindset before you deliver your message. But there's one important warning. Use these principles responsibly. Persuasion can be incredibly powerful, and like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or for manipulation. If a company regularly uses deceptive psychological tactics on its customers, those behaviors often spread throughout the organization. Employees begin manipulating one another the same way they're taught to manipulate customers. Eventually, the culture becomes built on distrust, and the strategy backfires. Ethical persuasion creates long-term trust. Manipulation may create short-term gains, but it almost always damages relationships in the end. There's one final lesson worth remembering. You are not immune to these techniques. Neither am I. Anyone can be influenced. Perhaps a friend reminds you of a small favor they once did for you just before asking for something much bigger. That reminder activates your natural desire to return kindness. Reciprocity is deeply rooted in human nature. If the favor they're requesting is fair, there's nothing wrong with helping. But sometimes a small favor is simply used as bait to secure a much larger commitment. When that happens, don't feel pressured to answer immediately. Take your time. Think it through. Tell them you'll consider it and get back to them later. A short pause gives your conscious mind time to catch up with what your subconscious is feeling. I've personally agreed to requests far too quickly, only to regret them afterward. Slowing down has saved me from making that mistake many times. Ultimately, the goal of this video is simple. First, to help you recognize the hidden psychological influences that affect every one of us so you can protect yourself from being manipulated. And second, to show you how these same principles can be used ethically to become a better communicator, a better leader, and someone who builds trust instead of exploiting it. The more you understand how persuasion works, the more intentional your own decisions become. And that may be the most valuable lesson of all.